Welcome, the anointed ones. Pay attention. When the truth refuses to die, it starts making noise loud enough to wake the world. That's exactly where your story stands right now. It's no longer a whisper, no longer a private wound, no longer something you hide because it might make people uncomfortable. No, your story has grown legs, lungs, and lightning. It's moving through timelines, conversations, and spiritual corridors like it's looking for the one thing your enemies never wanted it to find: an audience. And here's the shocking fact many people don't know. Psychologists have documented that when a group targets a single individual, the group ends up revealing more about their own sickness than the person they're trying to destroy. You didn't just endure cruelty, you accidentally exposed an entire psychological ecosystem that should have come with a warning label. That's why your story is about to make you famous. Not because you chased attention, but because the truth is tired of being quiet. What was done to you wasn't just wrong, it was bizarre, obsessive, coordinated, and downright medically questionable. The kind of behavior that makes people say, "Wait, this is what they were doing behind closed doors?" The kind that forces even the calmest person to clear their throat, sit forward and say, "Hold on, run that back." And you walked through the madness like someone who didn't realize the entire cast had lost the script. Half the time you didn't know if you were living life or starring in a psychological thriller that forgot to pay you. And let's be honest, if life had a camera crew, your villains would have begged production to blur their faces before the episode aired. But here's the twist that keeps the world hooked. Your survival wasn't the plot twist. Your clarity was. You went through experiences that should have shattered your mind, yet you emerged with the one thing they never expected you to have: a story that exposes them without needing exaggeration, embellishment, or dramatic sound effects. Your story is gripping because it's real. It's terrifying because it's provable. And it's legendary because it unmasks a sickness people pretend doesn't exist. So now, the world leans in, not to pity you, not to rescue you, but to witness how someone walked through a human nightmare and came out with receipts, wisdom, and a sense of humor that survived the apocalypse. This is your moment. This is your turning point. This is the part where the truth steps out from backstage and takes center stage, with your name lighting up the marquee. Number 1, your story isn't inspirational. It's evidence of a psychological infection in the people who targeted you. What happened to you wasn't just mistreatment or jealousy gone wrong. It was a loud, undeniable sign that something was deeply unwell inside the people who came after you. The level of cruelty you faced didn't come from normal conflict or everyday misunderstandings. It came from individuals who were carrying an emotional sickness they refused to acknowledge. They weren't reacting to who you are. They were reacting to what your presence exposed inside them. When someone carries unhealed bitterness, insecurity, envy, and resentment long enough, it starts leaking out of them like a virus. You walked into their lives with a clean spirit, a clear conscience, and a pure heart. And that alone triggered them in ways they couldn't hide. Your story isn't inspirational because you suffered. It's powerful because it reveals how some people will go to disturbing lengths just to avoid facing their own truth. They twisted narratives, manipulated situations, exaggerated flaws, and tried to stain your character, not because you deserved any of it, but because they couldn't stand the clarity that naturally radiated from you. You didn't have to speak for them to feel exposed. You didn't have to defend yourself for them to feel threatened. You simply existed, and that alone stripped away the masks they were wearing in their own lives. Their behavior didn't just show who they were, it showed the emotional infections they had been hiding for years. Normal people don't gather in groups to tear someone down. Healthy minds don't obsess over destroying a person who hasn't harmed them. Balanced individuals don't feel threatened by someone who is simply trying to live with integrity. The way they targeted you revealed their internal corruption long before you ever understood what you were dealing with. The sickness was never in your story. It was in their response to your existence. And this is what makes your journey so captivating to others now. The truth is finally being seen for what it is. The mess wasn't created by you, it was exposed by you. And when people look back on everything you endured, they won't just be shocked by the cruelty. They'll be shocked by how clearly it exposes the emotional decay that had been growing in those people long before you arrived. Your story is not their victory, it's their diagnosis. Number 2, your pain became their currency, and they kept spending it until you became too expensive to afford. There are people who don't just watch others suffer, they feed off it. Your pain became a type of currency in their world, something they could trade, gossip about, bond over, or use to feel powerful. They used your struggles, your setbacks, and your vulnerabilities like it was some sort of emotional marketplace where your discomfort made them feel richer and more important. The sick part is that most of them didn't even realize how deeply they depended on your pain to feel alive or relevant. Your name became their entertainment. Your challenges became their talking points. Your silence was their playground. But all currencies have limits, and your pain eventually became too costly for them to keep spending freely. Every time they tried to break you, you grew. Every time they tried to embarrass you, you gained clarity. Every time they tried to use your name for their ego, the truth sharpened itself. Their little games, their quiet attacks, their whispered lies, all of it worked only as long as they believed you were weak. They miscalculated. What they didn't expect was that their attempts to drain you would end up draining their credibility, their reputation, their energy, and their peace. Your growth raised the price of admission. They couldn't keep up. You became someone they could no longer afford to talk about, because the narrative no longer matched reality. You became too healed for their old stories to stick, too aware for their manipulation to work, too strong for their gossip to carry any weight. What used to be fun for them suddenly became a mirror they didn't want to look into. They wanted you broken, because that was the only version of you their egos could afford. Once you outgrew that version, the cost of trying to bring you down skyrocketed. They spent years trying to lower your value, but every attack only raised it. They tried to drain you, but ended up draining themselves. They tried to dim your name, but lit it up instead. And now, the same people who used your pain as a shortcut to feel powerful have to watch you become someone they can't touch, can't control, and can't reduce. Your pain used to be their currency. Now your healing is their bankruptcy. Number 3. The reason your story will make you famous is because it reveals a system, not just people, that failed. Your story carries weight because it goes far beyond individual cruelty. Anyone can deal with one toxic person, one jealous friend, or one manipulative family member. But your experience wasn't just one person acting out. It was a chain of people, environments, and structures that all responded the same way, with silence, denial, or more abuse. When multiple people mistreat the same individual, it exposes something deeper than personal conflict. It exposes a system that was never designed to protect you in the first place. You didn't just face betrayal, you faced a pattern that shows how communities, families, workplaces, and even institutions can rally around the wrong things and ignore the right ones. They valued comfort over truth. They protected the familiar over the innocent. They defended the loudest voices instead of the honest ones. Your story pulls back the curtain on how quickly a group can normalize cruelty when the person being mistreated threatens old dynamics they're too scared to confront. And that's why your story grows bigger than you. It highlights how easy it is for people to participate in injustice without realizing that silence is participation. You weren't just failed by individuals. You were failed by systems that pride themselves on fairness, loyalty, and morality until it's time to stand on those principles. Your journey exposes how these systems collapse the moment a real test arrives. People watching your story unfold will realize that your experience mirrors something many have gone through, but never had the courage or language to explain. You're giving shape to a collective truth, that the environments people trust the most are often the ones that look the other way when harm is done. You make it clear that the problem wasn't that you were too sensitive or too outspoken. The problem was that these systems were too invested in staying comfortable. Your rise brings attention not because of pity, but because your story forces people to reflect on their own environments. It shows them how easy it is for entire groups to fail someone who deserved support. And the more your truth spreads, the more people begin recognizing the cracks in their own surroundings. That's why your story will make you famous. It exposes what many live through but never speak about, and people will connect to you because you finally said what they've been carrying for years. Number 4, you didn't survive because you're strong. You survived because your spirit refused to be rewritten by sick minds. People love to say you survived because you're strong, but that's not the real truth. Strength alone wouldn't have carried you through what you went through. Strength can break. Strength can collapse. Strength can run out. What saved you was something far deeper and far more unshakable. Your spirit refused to absorb the madness that surrounded you. While they tried to twist your reality, crush your identity, and reshape your truth to fit their insecurities, something inside you stood up and said, "No, this is not who I am." You weren't fighting to stay alive, you were fighting to stay yourself. That's a different kind of battle. Their goal was to slowly pull you into their chaos, to make you doubt your own thoughts, question your own value, and shrink yourself until you fit inside the small box where they felt comfortable. They wanted you confused, unsure, and dependent. They wanted you to internalize their dysfunction so deeply that you'd forget who you were before they tried to break you. And yet, no matter how loud their lies were, something in you stayed clean. Something refused to be infected. While they projected their insecurities onto you, you didn't swallow them. While they tried to make you feel guilty for things you didn't do, you kept a sense of inner truth they couldn't erase. While they tried to make you see yourself through their sick lens, your spirit refused to wear their version of you. That's why you survived. Not because you fought them harder, not because you threw punches back, but because you didn't merge with the madness they lived in. There's a quiet miracle in that. Many people break not because the world hits them too hard, but because they start believing the lies whispered at them. They adopt the identity someone else forced onto them. But you didn't. Even when you doubted yourself, even when you were exhausted, even when you felt alone, you still carried an inner truth that kept you from slipping into the mental chaos they wanted you to drown in. Your spirit held the line. Your soul stayed intact. Your identity remained yours. They tried to rewrite you, but you refused to become their creation. That resistance, silent, steady, and unshakable, is the real reason you're still standing. That's what makes your survival extraordinary. Number 5, what they did to you. Looked personal, but it was actually a ritual of control meant to silence anyone who lives outside their mental cage. The way they treated you might have felt personal, targeted, and directed at you alone, but the truth runs much deeper. Their behavior wasn't random, it wasn't emotional impulse, it wasn't even true hatred. It followed a specific pattern, the same pattern used against anyone who refuses to shrink themselves to fit someone else's small-minded world. They used isolation, defamation, emotional starvation, and spiritual sabotage, not because of who you are, but because of what you represented. You existed outside their mental cage, and people who think like them always react the same way to someone they can't control. They attack. Isolation was the first step. They tried to cut you off, disconnect you from support, and weaken your foundation. Isolation makes a person easier to doubt themselves, easier to manipulate, easier to gaslight. They weren't punishing you. They were creating a controlled environment where you'd feel like you had nowhere to stand but on their distorted version of reality. Then came the defamation, the quiet whispers, the twisted stories, the subtle misrepresentations. They didn't need proof. They needed an audience. They used gossip like a weapon, because if they could damage how others saw you, they could pressure you into doubting how you saw yourself. This wasn't conversation. It was character surgery, performed without your consent. Emotional starvation followed next. They withheld warmth, withheld validation, withheld basic human decency. Not because you deserved coldness, but because they needed you emotionally weakened. When someone is starved of connection, they're more likely to cling to the very people harming them. It's not just cruel, it's strategic. And the final layer was spiritual sabotage. They tried to choke your purpose, undermine your confidence, distort your intuition, and make you question the very gifts that set you apart. They didn't fear losing you. They feared losing control over the narrative that placed them above you. Their superiority was an illusion, and your presence threatened to expose just how fragile that illusion really was. You weren't dealing with personal attacks. You were dealing with people performing the same tired ritual they've used on anyone who refuses to bow to their small reality. You didn't trigger them by being wrong. You triggered them by being free. And instead of expanding themselves, they chose to attack what they couldn't cage. Their behavior wasn't about you. It was about protecting the mental prison they built for themselves, a cage you refused to enter. Number 6. Their obsession with destroying you was a diagnosis. Your existence confronted them with the truth. They pretended not to know. Their fixation with tearing you down was never about who you were as a person. It was a flashing, undeniable signal of what was happening inside them. Your presence stirred up truths they spent years avoiding, truths they hoped no one would ever expose, especially not someone who wasn't even trying. You triggered things they never dealt with, old guilt they buried, insecurities they masked with arrogance, failures they covered with ego, and personal shadows they refused to face. They weren't angry with you. They were terrified of what you represented. People who haven't done the inner work become emotionally fragile around those who carry authenticity. You didn't need to say anything. Your behavior, your empathy, your consistency, and your growth challenged narratives they built about themselves. They depended on certain illusions to move through life. Illusions of superiority, competence, innocence, moral high ground. You didn't break those illusions. You simply existed in a way that made those illusions crumble on their own. That's why their obsession was so persistent. You weren't a threat to their safety. You were a threat to their self-image. They needed you to be wrong, weak, flawed, confused, or broken to justify their behavior. But every time you refused to fall apart, every time you held on to your integrity, every time you continued rising despite the chaos they caused, it exposed their inner mess like a spotlight. You didn't just disturb their comfort, you disturbed the psychological scaffolding they relied on to feel stable. Their obsession wasn't hatred, it was panic disguised as hostility. Some people live their entire lives avoiding self-awareness, and then someone like you shows up. Someone whose energy moves differently, someone whose intentions are clean, someone who isn't trying to manipulate the room or compete with anyone. That kind of presence exposes people who have built entire personalities on lies. You became a walking trigger they couldn't escape. Your existence revealed cracks they were desperate to hide. The truth is simple. If they were whole, your presence would not have bothered them. If they were healed, your growth wouldn't feel like an attack. If they were honest with themselves, your clarity wouldn't feel like confrontation. Their obsession with destroying you was their own internal alarm, screaming that something inside them was unstable. They weren't diagnosing you. They were diagnosing themselves every time they reacted to you. Number 7. Your story becomes legendary, because it documents how far people will go to attack what they can't become. Your story carries a certain weight because it exposes a truth most people never talk about. When a person embodies qualities others secretly crave but can't produce within themselves, admiration quickly turns into hostility. Instead of learning from you, they tried to dismantle you. Instead of being inspired, they became threatened. Instead of growing, they tried to drag you back to a level where your light wouldn't make their shadows look so obvious. They weren't fighting you. They were fighting the fact that their own lives didn't reflect the strength, grace, or authenticity you naturally carried. Your strength wasn't something they celebrated. It was something they examined like a problem they needed to solve. They studied you, not to understand you, but to figure out how to fracture the parts of you that made them feel inferior. They weren't irritated by your flaws. They were irritated by the fact that you handled life in ways they could never manage. Every time you overcame something, it reminded them of something they hadn't. Every time you stood up for yourself, it reminded them of the times they stayed silent. Every time you healed, it reminded them of the wounds they refused to face. Your kindness became fuel for their exploitation. You offered empathy, and they took it as permission to drain you. You offered support, and they interpreted it as weakness. They weren't rejecting your kindness. They were taking advantage of it until it was no longer convenient. People who refuse to grow will always mistake warmth for vulnerability and compassion for surrender. They drained you because they couldn't generate the emotional currency you provided so effortlessly. Your individuality was the final trigger. You didn't blend in. You didn't shrink. You didn't play the role they wanted you to play. And for people who rely on control, that's unforgivable. They targeted you not because you were problematic, but because you refused to be programmable. You weren't designed to fold into their ideas of who you should be. You lived by your own rhythm, your own morals, your own purpose. And that independence exposed how dependent they were on the approval of others. In reality, you weren't surrounded by peers, you were surrounded by emotional poachers, people who watched you the way hunters watch prey, not out of need, but out of envy. Your story becomes legendary, not because of what was done to you, but because of how clearly it reveals the lengths people go to when confronted with a person they cannot imitate, control, or replace. They didn't try to destroy you because you were weak. They tried because you represented everything they could never be. Number 8. The sickest part was how normal. They made the abuse look, and how crazy they tried to make you look for not accepting it. One of the most disturbing parts of your story is not the abuse itself. It's the way they disguised it as everyday behavior. They wrapped cruelty in casualness. They treated disrespect as if it were routine. They disguised emotional harm as jokes, misunderstandings, or just the way things are. They normalized the abnormal with such confidence that you began questioning your own perception. That's where the real damage was done. They didn't just hurt you. They made you feel wrong for noticing it. This is what people find jaw-dropping when they hear your story. You weren't just mistreated. You were psychologically conditioned to believe the mistreatment was acceptable, or worse, that you were overreacting for not tolerating it. Every time you tried to speak up, they twisted the narrative. They made you feel dramatic, sensitive, unreasonable, anything that would keep you quiet. Their goal was never your silence. Silence alone was too risky because silence can break. Their goal was confusion, the mental fog that makes a person doubt their instincts, rewrite their memories, and second-guess their own truth. Confusion is one of the most powerful tools in psychological manipulation. It's a leash without a clasp. It's a prison without visible walls. It keeps a person stuck because they can't tell whether what they're feeling is valid or all in their head. They wanted you in that state indefinitely. It gave them control without ever looking controlling. It allowed them to mistreat you without ever appearing abusive. It allowed them to keep their hands clean while your mind spiraled. But you broke out of it. That's what makes your story so gripping. You didn't escape a physical trap. You escaped a mental one. You chewed through the leash they thought would hold you for life. You began trusting your instincts again. You started noticing the patterns they were desperate to hide. You walked away from the role they forced on you and stepped into clarity they never prepared for. And now that the fog has lifted, their behavior is exposed in brutal detail. The world sees what you endured without the distortion they tried to place over your eyes. The shock isn't just what they did. It's how carefully they crafted the illusion that you were the problem for refusing to accept it. They spent years trying to make you look unstable. In the end, they only proved how unstable they were for calling abuse normal. Number 9. You became the villain in their story. Because they couldn't survive being the villain in your truth. What they did to you was never about who you were. It was about who they couldn't stand being in the mirror of your presence. The moment your truth started exposing cracks in their carefully crafted image, they had to find a way to flip the script. It was easier for them to paint you as the problem than to admit that their behavior was the real disaster. Calling you difficult, ungrateful, or too much wasn't an observation. It was a shield. Those words weren't descriptions. They were hiding places. You didn't actually change. What changed was their need to protect the version of themselves they were desperately clinging to, the version where they looked kind, wise, generous, innocent, or morally superior. You, simply by existing honestly, threatened that storyline, and because they couldn't rewrite their own character, they rewrote yours. They turned you into the villain because they couldn't emotionally survive being cast as the one who caused harm. Every time you told the truth about what happened, even quietly, they felt exposed. Even when you didn't speak at all, your silence felt like evidence. Your growth felt like proof. Your healing felt like a confession letter, pointing straight at them. So they tried to sink you before your reality surfaced. They twisted narratives. They exaggerated flaws. They weaponized misunderstandings. They fed people half-truths dressed as concern. They didn't want justice. They wanted distance from accountability. And the funniest part? Their attempt to smear you wasn't a strategy. It was a confession. Only people who have something to hide rush to cover their tracks. Only the guilty work over time to rewrite the timeline. Only those who can't sit with themselves need an enemy to distract from the mess inside their own emotions. But truth has a strange habit. It never dies. It just waits. And as you stepped into clarity, their story started falling apart on its own. People began to notice the inconsistencies. The lies aged badly. The mask slipped. Their version of you stopped making sense because it was never rooted in reality. It was rooted in their fear. Now your truth is stronger than their storyline. You don't need to defend yourself anymore. Their behavior did the talking, and the world is beginning to see it. Number 10. Your story will make you famous, because it proves human darkness has a pattern, and you mapped it without meaning. Your story isn't powerful because of the pain you endured. It's powerful because of what the pain revealed. Most people go through life feeling something is wrong but never knowing where the rot starts or how deep it runs. You, without intending to, traced every root, every crack, every hidden motive. You didn't just survive darkness, you decoded it. You exposed how harm isn't random. It follows a structure, a rhythm, a routine that repeats across families, workplaces, relationships, and entire communities. You lived through people pretending love while practicing control. You saw how manipulation hides behind politeness. You learned that some leaders are actually predators dressed in respectability. You recognized the signs, the subtle isolation, the shifting narratives, the groupthink, the unspoken rules that protect abusers, the pressure to stay silent, the punishment for being awake in a room full of people who prefer dreams. You didn't just witness these patterns, you became the map that reveals them. And that's why your story will travel far beyond the people who hurt you. It's not gossip, it's not drama. It's a blueprint for understanding human corruption. People will read your experiences and suddenly understand their own. They'll see themselves in your timeline and realize the madness they endured had a pattern too. They just couldn't name it until you lived it out loud. Your testimony forces society to look and familiar. It shows how victims are silenced not with violence, but with doubt. It exposes how communities protect the wrong people while demonizing the ones who can see clearly. You turned invisible abuse into something visible. You turned psychological warfare into evidence. Without knowing it, you created a guide for others to escape the same traps. That's why your story will be studied, shared, quoted, analyzed, not because you suffered, but because you illuminated the architecture behind the suffering. You cracked open the places where truth was sealed shut. You showed that healing isn't just personal, it's revolutionary. You didn't just map the darkness, you marked every exit point, and the world is going to follow that map. Number 11. The signs that you were innocent were always there, but they pretended not to see because guilt is blind by choice. The truth about you was never hidden. It wasn't subtle, complicated, or layered in mystery. Your innocence was loud in ways words couldn't capture. Your actions aligned with your values. Your intentions matched your behavior. Your story never changed, even when the world around you twisted itself into knots, trying to make you look suspicious. Everything about you was steady, transparent, and consistent, the very things guilty people cannot imitate. But the problem was never your clarity. It was their need for confusion. People who carry guilt don't actually fear being wrong. They fear being seen. They fear that the spotlight on your honesty would expose their motives, their envy, their sabotage, their manipulation. So they did what the guilty always do. They pretended not to notice the truth staring them in the face. They minimized your good, exaggerated your flaws, and rewrote your narrative because your real one was too clean for their agenda. Innocence doesn't threaten corrupt people because it's perfect. It threatens them because it's consistent. And consistency exposes every lie without you having to speak. They ignored the way you always showed up with openness. They ignored how you admitted your mistakes while they hid theirs. They ignored how you sought clarity while they created confusion. They ignored the fact that every accusation against you relied on assumptions, rumors, and storytelling, while everything about you could be proven, witnessed, tested, and confirmed. But the truth was never too hard to understand. It was too hard for them to accept, because if they accepted your innocence, they would also have to accept their cruelty. If they recognized your integrity, they'd have to face their own dishonesty. If they acknowledged your transparency, they'd have to confront their hidden agendas. Guilt doesn't make people blind, it makes them choose blindness. It's easier to demonize the innocent than confront the shadows inside themselves. But here's the twist they never expected. The truth they buried didn't die. It grew. It gathered strength. It gained witnesses. It collected evidence in silence, waiting for the right moment to speak louder than all their lies. And now that your story is rising, your innocence isn't just visible, it's undeniable. And the people who pretended not to see it are the ones trembling the most. Number 12. Their cruelty didn't break you. It broke the illusion that you needed them. The turning point in your story wasn't the moment they pushed you to your limit. It was the moment you finally saw the truth behind the chaos. Their cruelty didn't destroy you. It destroyed the lies you were trained to believe about them. You were raised, conditioned, or manipulated into thinking certain people were essential to your identity, your worth, your belonging, your safety. They played roles they never deserved: family, friend, mentor, partner, supporter. You were encouraged to depend on them, trust them, and see them as pillars. But pillars don't crumble when pressured. People who truly love you don't switch faces when the room changes. Their mistreatment forced you to confront a painful revelation. The people you thought you needed were just placeholders, not foundations. Their affection was conditional, their loyalty selective, their support performative. They were never your source. They were simply occupying space you hadn't yet realized you could fill yourself. Every cruel word, every dismissive response, every manipulation peeled back another layer of illusion until you stood face to face with the truth. You were holding on to people who were draining you, not sustaining you. And that's when the real transformation began. Not when you cut them off, not when you walked away, but when you realized you didn't lose anything of value when they lost access to you. Their absence felt like relief, not emptiness. Their silence felt peaceful, not punishing. Their rejection exposed a deeper reality. You were powerful before them, during them, and after them. You didn't need their approval because your soul was building you from within. You didn't need their validation because your spirit was already calibrated to truth. You didn't need their version of love because it was never love to begin with. By the time you rose from the chaos, you weren't the same person. You weren't waiting for apologies. You weren't hoping they'd understand. You weren't trying to rebuild connections that were based on deception. You became self-sourced, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. You tapped into a strength that was always yours, but hidden behind the illusion of dependency. Their cruelty revealed what you were truly made of. And once you saw that, their power over you evaporated. What broke wasn't you. It was the spell. You walked away sovereign, whole, and untouchable. Number 13. What was done to you didn't make you famous. How you refused to adapt to their sick environment did. The world won't talk about your story because of the cruelty you endured. It will talk about it because of how you responded to that cruelty. Pain alone doesn't create legends. Resistance does. You were placed in an environment where most people would have adjusted themselves just to survive. They would have dimmed their personality, lowered their morals, copied the behavior around them, or blended in to avoid becoming a target. But you didn't bend. You didn't absorb their mindset. You didn't allow your spirit to be reprogrammed by people who were already corrupted on the inside. Everything around you encouraged you to shrink, submit, and adapt. You were surrounded by twisted norms, double standards, and emotional games dressed up as tradition, respect, or family rules. These weren't just unhealthy patterns. They were traps meant to mold you into something predictable and compliant. But instead of adjusting, you held your ground. You held on to your truth, even when it cost you comfort, belonging, and peace. And that kind of refusal is rare, especially in environments where survival often depends on silence. They expected you to become like them. They thought, if they applied enough pressure, you'd eventually break into pieces small enough to control. But every attempt to shape you only revealed how different your inner structure was. Your integrity didn't crack. Your values didn't dissolve. Your identity didn't shift to accommodate their dysfunction. You stayed yourself in a place designed to erase people. And once you refuse to adapt to a sick system, the system panics, because your existence exposes how unhealthy it actually is. That's why your story spreads, not because you were a victim, but because you didn't internalize the darkness thrown at you. People look at you and see proof that it's possible to stand in the middle of madness without becoming part of it. They see someone who resisted what others collapsed under. They see someone who chose truth over approval and authenticity over survival tactics. Your refusal is what makes you unforgettable. Your refusal is what turns your story into something people study, admire, and draw strength from. You didn't escape a toxic world by becoming like it. You escaped because you refused to let it infect you. That's the part that makes you chosen. Not superiority, endurance without corruption, not privilege, clarity without compromise. What was done to you didn't elevate your name. Your refusal to become like them did. Number 14. The world will celebrate you because you became the blueprint for surviving a reality that was engineered to break you. Your life won't be remembered because you suffered. Countless people suffer, and their stories never leave the walls that trapped them. What makes yours different is what you demonstrated while walking through the fire. You became living proof that the human spirit can be surrounded by manipulation, betrayal, and psychological warfare, and still refuse to transform into the very thing trying to destroy it. You weren't just surviving. You were quietly documenting the anatomy of resilience in a world built to crush anyone who refuses to conform. You didn't collapse from the attacks on your identity. You didn't turn cruel just because cruelty was what you were given. You didn't let the lies define you, the betrayal shape you, or the sabotage redirect you. Every tactic they used was designed to fracture your mind, weaken your resolve, and push you into a version of yourself that would validate their treatment of you. But you didn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, your resistance became a roadmap, a silent guide for anyone who ever felt buried alive by someone else's sickness. People won't just study your story, they'll learn from it. You exposed the hidden strategies of emotional predators without ever intending to. You revealed how spiritual warfare operates behind smiles and polite conversations. You showed how character assassination works and how to walk through it without losing your sanity. You demonstrated how a person can be isolated yet not broken, targeted yet not destroyed, surrounded by darkness yet still generate their own light. This is why your story will be celebrated. It doesn't end in bitterness, despair, or self-destruction. It ends in revelation. It ends in clarity. It ends with you standing on the other side, not as a victim, not as someone begging for sympathy, but as the blueprint for endurance. You showed that survival isn't about brute strength. It's about refusing to let your spirit be rewritten by corrupted people. You showed that healing isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about reclaiming your identity from the hands that tried to distort it. Your story carries a universal truth wrapped in personal pain, that a human being can be targeted, misunderstood, sabotaged, and lied on, and still rise with their humanity intact. That truth is rare, it's powerful, and it's why the world will honor you. You didn't just survive a reality engineered to break you. You unintentionally became the model for how to overcome it. When you step back and look at the full arc of your journey, one truth becomes impossible to deny. You didn't just survive what was done to you. You transformed it into evidence, revelation, and spiritual authority. Everything they tried to hide became visible through you. Everything they tried to twist became clear because of you. Everything they attempted to sabotage ended up sharpening your discernment, strengthening your identity, and exposing the sickness they carried so confidently. Your story is not just a record of what happened. It is a living document of how corruption collapses when it meets a soul that refuses to bend. You became the blueprint for surviving environments that were designed to suffocate growth. You revealed the psychological traps, the silent manipulations, the unspoken rules, and the spiritual warfare that most people never learn how to see. You turned pain into pattern recognition. You turned chaos into clarity. You turned survival into wisdom the world didn't even know it needed. And the irony is breathtaking. The very people who tried to silence your voice became the architects of your elevation. Their cruelty pushed you into truth. Their attacks uncovered your gift. Their sabotage carved out your purpose. Their attempts to erase you ended up engraving you into history, not because the suffering made you special, but because your response to the suffering made you immortal. What makes your journey extraordinary is not the darkness you walked through, but the fact that you never allowed that darkness to rewire your spirit. You didn't adapt to their dysfunction. You didn't internalize their madness. You didn't let their emotional starvation kill your ability to feel, love, think, or discern. You walked out with your soul intact, your identity untampered with, and your vision sharper than ever. And now, the world looks at your story and finds itself in it. People study your path because it exposes the hidden machinery of human cruelty and reveals the resilience needed to outgrow it. You became a mirror, a warning, a testimony, and a guide, all at once. Your survival isn't a chapter, it's a revelation. Your voice isn't noise, it's evidence. Your existence isn't random, it's purposeful. So, as your story continues to rise, remember this: you did not become legendary because of the war you endured. You became legendary because you refused to become what the war wanted to make you. And now, if this message resonated with you, if it opened your eyes, strengthened your spirit, or reminded you of your own power, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, comment your thoughts, and share this video with someone who needs this truth today. Your support helps this message reach more people who are fighting their own unseen battles. Let's build this community together. God bless you.